I welcome you to my channel. Subscribe and listen to my new stories every day. I always thought Jenna and I had something solid, built on the usual foundations: trust, shared history, and 2 kids who meant the world to both of us. 14 years, a home, routines, and a life that seemed so ordinary it felt unbreakable. I ignored the warning signs. Why wouldn't I? We were busy, tired, stressed. That's what I told myself every time her words cut a little deeper, every time she came home late without a good reason. But something had shifted. Jenna wasn't the same woman I had married, and I could feel it in my bones long before I knew why. It was a Friday night when the real cracks started to show. Jenna was unusually quiet at dinner, pushing her food around her plate like a kid forced to eat vegetables. I didn't push her to talk. We'd been through phases like this before, when life just grinds you down. But as I watched her, something felt off. She kept checking her phone, quickly glancing at the screen before flipping it face down on the table. Again and again. My gut told me something was wrong, but I didn't want to believe it. So, I let it slide. Later that night, she said she was going out with some work friends. "It's just a quick thing," she said, too casually. "I'll be back late, so don't wait up." There was an edge in her voice, like she was already defending herself against something I hadn't even accused her of. I shrugged, trying to shake off the unease that settled in my chest. "Have fun," I mumbled, heading back to the TV, my mind drifting in a million directions. She left, but I couldn't focus on anything. My thoughts kept returning to her phone, how she guarded it, how her tone had shifted, how the tension in the air seemed thicker than usual. Eventually, I gave in to my suspicions. After all, she'd left the phone charging in the bedroom while she got ready. I had no right, I told myself. I had every right, my gut argued back. We'd been married for over a decade, there should be no secrets, no reason for mistrust. But there I was, creeping into the bedroom like a man about to cross a line he could never uncross. Her phone was locked, but I knew the code. We never hid anything like that from each other. Or at least, we hadn't. I told myself I'd just check quickly, put my mind at ease. No harm, no foul. My hands shook a little as I swiped through her messages, mostly harmless exchanges with coworkers, school reminders about the kids, nothing alarming, until I saw his name. George. At first, the messages didn't seem suspicious. They talked about work, about friends, about mundane things. But the more I scrolled, the worse it got. Inside jokes I didn't get, plans made for times I knew she was working late, a text that made my blood run cold: "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. You still drive me crazy." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. My vision blurred as I read the text over and over again, hoping it would somehow change the more I looked at it. But it didn't. And the truth stared back at me like a taunt. George wasn't just anyone. He was my best friend, the guy who had been there for me through thick and thin, the guy who stood beside me at my wedding, the guy who shared beers and stories and life's ups and downs with me. And now I knew he'd been sharing my wife, too. My hands tightened around the phone, rage bubbling up inside me, but I didn't smash it. Not yet. I sat down hard on the edge of the bed, my heart racing, my mind spinning. How long had this been going on? How many lies had she told me while slipping into George's bed, laughing behind my back? I couldn't breathe. Every memory of the past few months twisted into something ugly and tainted. All the time she came home late, brushed off my questions, or gave me those half-hearted explanations about work events, it all fit now. The late nights, the sudden mood swings, the distance I'd tried to ignore. I couldn't sit still any longer. I paced the room, fists clenched, feeling like my world was crumbling around me. What was I supposed to do? Confront her? Storm over to George's place and knock him out? I wanted to scream, to hit something, to tear apart everything I thought I knew about my marriage. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I waited. I waited for her to come home, that sick feeling festering inside me as I replayed every lie, every excuse she'd ever made. I didn't know how I'd face her, what I'd say, how I'd keep from losing it completely when I saw her again. But one thing was certain, things were never going back to how they were. The marriage I thought I had was over, shattered the moment I unlocked that phone. It was nearly 2 in the morning when Jenna finally walked through the door. She moved quietly, trying not to wake me, but I was wide awake, lying in the dark with my mind racing. I heard her slip into the bathroom, the sound of running water filling the silence. When she crawled into bed beside me, she smelled faintly of perfume, one that wasn't hers. I stayed silent, pretending to sleep, my body tense. I wanted to confront her right then and there, to throw the phone at her and demand answers. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. Not yet. I needed to process everything first, to figure out my next move. Rage simmered just beneath the surface, but I kept it in check, for now. The next morning, everything was normal. She acted like nothing had changed, like she hadn't just spent the night with another man. She kissed me on the cheek before heading off to work, telling me she'd be late again. I nodded, keeping my voice steady, playing along with her charade. But inside, I was planning my revenge. I couldn't just leave. That would be too easy, too clean. I needed her to feel the betrayal, the devastation, the pain she'd inflicted on me. I needed her to know that I wasn't some clueless fool she could walk all over. No, I'd let her dig her own grave, and then, when the time was right, I'd bury her in it. I kept my distance after that night, playing the part of the oblivious husband while everything inside me shifted. It was strange, knowing the truth but pretending not to. I'd see Jenna laughing, smiling, talking to the kids like nothing was wrong, while I stood on the outside, watching her through a new lens. Everything she did seemed calculated, false, a mask to hide the betrayal simmering beneath the surface. But I knew better now, and every word she said felt like a weapon I could use later. My rage wasn't the fiery kind, it had cooled into something far more dangerous. Cold, deliberate, and patient. It was like holding a match just above a pile of gasoline, waiting for the right moment to drop it and watch everything go up in flames. I could see the end of our marriage coming, but it wasn't going to be on her terms. No, I was going to control how this played out. She just didn't know it yet. For weeks, I gathered every piece of evidence I could. When she left for work, I'd go through her things, meticulously checking her phone whenever I had the chance. There were more texts with George, plans to meet up, whispered jokes about me, hidden rendezvous that made my stomach turn. She thought she was being careful, but it wasn't enough. I was always one step ahead now, and I kept every little detail tucked away like bullets for when I'd need them. Jenna was so wrapped up in her lies that she didn't even notice how distant I'd become. I played the role of the devoted husband perfectly, smiling, nodding, pretending I didn't know a damn thing. But in my head, I was already crafting the perfect revenge. She thought she had the upper hand, that she could walk all over me, but she didn't realize the kind of man I'd become since that night. I wasn't going to confront her in some emotional outburst or lose control like she probably expected. No, this was going to be different. I'd learned that George wasn't just some passing fling for Jenna. They had been carrying on their affair for years, laughing behind my back while I lived in blissful ignorance. That knowledge twisted inside me like a knife. George, my best friend, how could I have been so blind? The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. But the anger fueled me, sharpened my focus. This wasn't just about Jenna anymore. George had betrayed me just as much as she had, and he wasn't getting away with it either. One night, after Jenna had fallen asleep, I went into the garage and grabbed a beer, sitting in the cold silence of the space that used to be my sanctuary. The kids were with my parents for the weekend, and Jenna was already planning her next work trip. She didn't even bother to hide it anymore, knowing I'd never question her. She had grown cocky, too comfortable in her deception. She thought she had me fooled, but she was wrong. So very wrong. As I sipped the beer, I thought about what I was going to do. Divorce was the obvious choice, but that was too easy. Too clean. Jenna needed to lose everything, her home, her reputation, her sense of security. I wanted her to feel the same crushing humiliation that she'd made me feel. And George? Well, he'd get his too. I wasn't going to let him walk away unscathed. I started by talking to a lawyer. I didn't tell Jenna, of course. She thought everything was fine. I kept it all under wraps, slowly building the case against her. It was surprisingly easy to put the pieces together. The texts, the emails, the dates that didn't line up with her supposed work trips, it all added up. And with every new piece of evidence, I felt a twisted satisfaction. This wasn't just about ending the marriage anymore. It was about destroying the life she thought she had built, one brick at a time. The lawyer was sharp, immediately understanding what needed to be done. We drafted up the divorce papers, making sure I would walk away with everything, the house, the kids, the savings, all of it. The prenuptial agreement she had laughed off so many years ago would be her downfall. Jenna had forgotten about it, but I hadn't. It was ironclad, and it would leave her with nothing. But that wasn't enough. I wanted her to feel the betrayal, the humiliation. So I bided my time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Then came the weekend trip. Jenna was all smiles that Friday morning as she packed her bags, kissing me on the cheek before heading out the door. "I'll be back Sunday night," she said, her voice light and carefree. She didn't see the coldness in my eyes, didn't notice the way I barely responded. She was too focused on George, no doubt imagining the weekend they had planned together. As soon as she left, I went into action. First, I called the lawyer. Everything was set. The divorce papers were ready, the evidence compiled, the house in my name. But I wasn't done yet. I needed one last thing to make sure Jenna's world came crashing down. I picked up the phone and dialed a private investigator I had been in contact with for the past few weeks. He had been following Jenna and George, documenting their every move, and now it was time to put it all to use. "Yeah, they're headed out of town," I told him. "I need you to get some footage, something that can't be disputed." "No problem," he replied. "I've already got plenty, but I'll make sure we get something definitive this weekend." I hung up, feeling the weight of everything settling in. The trap was set, and all that was left was to spring it. By Sunday night, Jenna's life would be in ruins, and she wouldn't even see it coming. The weekend passed slowly, each hour dragging by as I imagined what Jenna was doing with George. I didn't even care anymore. The anger had dulled into something colder, more calculated. I just wanted it to be over. I wanted to see her face when she realized what I had done, when she understood that her lies had finally caught up with her. Sunday evening rolled around, and Jenna came home, exhausted but smiling. She dropped her bags at the door and greeted me with a hug, like everything was normal. "Missed you," she said, kissing me on the cheek. I forced a smile, playing along. "Missed you too," I lied. She went upstairs to unpack, and I waited in the living room, sipping a beer, knowing that this was the last moment of calm before everything exploded. The private investigator had already sent me the footage, clear as day, showing Jenna and George together, holding hands, kissing, laughing. I had everything I needed. All that was left was to watch it unfold. Jenna came back downstairs, sitting next to me on the couch like nothing was wrong. "How was your weekend?" she asked, her voice sweet and casual. I smiled, my heart pounding in my chest as I prepared for what was coming next. "It was fine," I said, leaning back and taking another sip of my beer. "But we need to talk." The words hung in the air between us like a loaded gun. Jenna shifted slightly on the couch, the smile still plastered on her face, but I could see the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "Talk?" she repeated, her voice just a touch too light, too controlled. She had no idea what was coming. And that made it all the more satisfying. I set my beer down on the table and leaned forward, locking eyes with her. For a moment, I wondered if I should ease into it, make it less painful. But then I remembered all the nights I lay awake, replaying every lie she'd told, every moment she spent with George while I trusted her. That anger, that cold, quiet rage, flared up again, and I knew I wasn't going to pull any punches. "Yeah," I said, keeping my voice steady. "We need to talk about your weekend." Her eyes darted away for a second, just a flicker, but it was enough. She was already on edge, already sensing that something was off. "What do you mean?" she asked, trying to sound casual as she leaned back into the couch. She even gave a little laugh, the kind she used when she wanted to diffuse tension. "It was just work, you know. Nothing exciting." Work. That was her cover. The lie she'd built her entire affair around. I almost admired her nerve. Almost. I didn't answer right away, letting the silence stretch out between us. The tension was building, and I could see her starting to squirm under the weight of it. She shifted again, glancing toward the hallway like she wanted to escape, but there was nowhere to go. Not this time. Finally, I leaned back, crossing my arms. "You know, Jenna," I said, keeping my tone conversational, "I've been doing a lot of thinking these past few weeks. About us. About our marriage." Her eyes snapped back to mine, and now the smile was gone. She didn't say anything, but I could see her processing, trying to figure out where this was going. "And I've realized something," I continued. "There's been a lot of dishonesty between us." There it was, a crack. She tensed up, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her breath hitching just slightly. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice quieter now, her confidence starting to waver. "I'm talking about George," I said, the name falling like a bomb between us. The silence was deafening. Jenna's face went pale, her mouth opening slightly as if to say something, but no words came out. She froze, her mind clearly scrambling for an escape, an excuse, anything that could salvage the situation. But she knew. She knew it was over. What about George?" she finally managed, her voice shaky. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, scrolling to the video the private investigator had sent me. I turned the screen toward her and hit play. The video was clear, Jenna and George walking hand in hand, laughing, kissing outside the hotel. It showed them going inside together, arm in arm, and then nothing for hours until they left the next morning, looking entirely too comfortable with each other. There was no mistaking what they'd been doing. Her eyes widened in horror as she watched, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Oh my God." I let the video play for a few more seconds, then calmly shut it off and placed my phone back on the table. "So," I said, leaning forward again, "let's cut the bullshit, Jenna. I know everything." She didn't move, didn't speak. She just sat there, staring at the spot where my phone had been, like she was waiting for some kind of miracle that would erase everything she'd just seen. But no miracle was coming. "I know about the texts, the trips, the lies," I continued, my voice steady, but with the edge of fury I'd been holding back for weeks. "You've been sleeping with George for years, and you thought I was too stupid to notice." Her hands were shaking now, her breath coming in quick, shallow bursts. "Mark, Don't," I cut her off sharply. "Don't you dare try to explain this away. I've seen everything. Every lie you've told, every time you went behind my back, every time you made me feel like an idiot." Tears welled up in her eyes, and she shook her head, her voice trembling. "Mark, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for it to happen. It was a mistake, I swear." "A mistake?" I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "A mistake is something you do once, Jenna. You've been doing this for years. Don't insult me by calling it a mistake. She opened her mouth to say something else, but I wasn't interested in hearing it. I was done listening to her excuses, her lies. I stood up, pacing the room as she sat there, frozen, watching me with wide, tear-filled eyes. I trusted you, I said, my voice rising. I trusted you, and you took that trust and you threw it away like it was nothing. You made me feel like a fool. Mark, please, she begged, standing up and reaching for me. I love you. I'm so sorry. I'll do anything to fix this, I swear. Please don't leave me. I turned to face her, her outstretched hand trembling in the space between us. You love me? I repeated, my voice incredulous. You love me, but you've been sleeping with my best friend for God knows how long. She nodded, tears streaming down her face now. I do love you, she sobbed. It was just a mistake, I was lonely, and George, he was there, and it just happened. I stared at her, the woman I'd married, the mother of my children, reduced to a sobbing, broken mess in front of me. And in that moment, I felt nothing but cold, hard satisfaction. This was what I had been waiting for, her downfall, her reckoning. Jenna, I said quietly, stepping closer to her. It's over. Her eyes widened, and she shook her head frantically. No, no, please, Mark. Don't say that. Don't leave me. I'll do anything. We can go to counseling, we can fix this. Please, just give me another chance. I took a deep breath, looking her straight in the eye. I've already filed for divorce. The words hit her like a physical blow, and she stumbled back, clutching the edge of the couch for support. No, she whispered, her voice cracking. No, you can't. You can't do this. I can, I said firmly. And I already have. The papers are filed. The house is mine. The kids are staying with me. You're done, Jenna. You lost everything the moment you decided to betray me. She collapsed onto the couch, sobbing uncontrollably, her hands covering her face. I watched her for a moment, that cold satisfaction still bubbling inside me. I had won. I had taken everything from her, just like she had taken everything from me. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her there to cry alone. It was over. There was nothing left to say. I left Jenna sobbing on the couch, her broken cries echoing through the house as I made my way down the hallway. My mind was buzzing, my emotions dulled by the cold sense of victory that had carried me through the past few weeks. I had done it. I had stripped her of everything she held dear. This was supposed to feel good. But as I climbed the stairs and entered the quiet of our bedroom, a strange emptiness began to creep in. The kids were with my parents for the week, so the house was silent. Too silent. I stood by the window, looking out into the night, wondering what came next. Jenna was still downstairs, her world collapsing in on itself, and here I was, alone with my thoughts. For years, my life had revolved around this house, this family. Jenna had been at the center of it, the core of everything I built my life around. And now that I had destroyed that, now that I had stripped her of everything, what was left? I stared out at the dark street below, trying to feel the satisfaction that had driven me to this point, but it wasn't there anymore. The cold satisfaction I'd felt was fading, replaced by something I couldn't quite name. The sound of footsteps pulled me out of my thoughts. I turned to see Jenna standing in the doorway, her face streaked with tears, her eyes hollow. She looked like a ghost of the woman I had once loved, broken and empty. For a moment, we just stood there in silence, the weight of everything hanging between us. I didn't mean for it to happen like this, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't think you'd find out. I wanted to snap back, to remind her that she had done this to herself. But instead, I just stood there, staring at her, feeling the heavy exhaustion of everything finally catching up with me. "Why, Jenna?" I asked, my voice rougher than I intended. "Why did you do it? Was it really worth it?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she sank down onto the edge of the bed, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "I don't know," she said, her voice breaking. "At first, it was just something different. George made me feel alive again, I guess. But then, it just kept going, and I didn't know how to stop. I didn't want to stop." I felt a bitter laugh escape me. "You didn't want to stop?" I echoed, shaking my head. "So you just kept lying, sneaking around, making me look like a fool." "I never wanted to hurt you," she said, her voice trembling. I thought maybe we could just keep things the way they were. I didn't want to lose you, Mark. I didn't want to lose our family. You didn't want to lose me." I scoffed. "Jenna, you lost me the second you started sneaking around with George. You just didn't care enough to notice." She flinched at my words, her face crumpling as fresh tears rolled down her cheeks. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." I wanted to tell her it was too late for apologies, that nothing she could say would change what she had done. But instead, I sat down on the bed beside her, my mind swirling with everything that had happened. We sat there in silence for a long time, the weight of our broken marriage pressing down on us. "I don't know what to do now," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've lost everything. You, the kids, everything." Her words should have brought me more satisfaction, but they didn't. Instead, they left a hollow ache in my chest that I couldn't ignore. I had wanted this, hadn't I? I had wanted her to lose everything, to feel the same devastation I had felt. But now that she had, why didn't it feel like enough? "I wanted to hurt you," I admitted, the words spilling out before I could stop them. "I wanted to make you feel the way you made me feel. I thought it would help. I thought it would fix everything." Jenna looked at me, her tear-filled eyes searching mine. "And did it?" she asked softly. "Did it fix anything?" I stared at her, the woman who had betrayed me, the woman I had loved for so long. And for the first time, I didn't have an answer. Instead, all I felt was a deep, crushing sadness that settled in my chest like a heavy weight. "No," I finally said, my voice barely audible. "It didn't fix anything." We sat there in the silence, both of us broken in our own ways. And in that moment, I realized that revenge had its price. I had gotten everything I wanted, her downfall, her tears, her regret. But what I hadn't expected was the emptiness that came with it. I had spent so much time plotting my revenge that I hadn't stopped to think about what came after. As the night wore on, Jenna finally stood up, wiping the last of her tears from her face. "I'll leave in the morning," she said quietly. "I know it's over. I'll go." I nodded, unable to find the words to respond. What was there to say? She was right. It was over. The marriage, the life we had built, it was all gone, destroyed by both of us. She walked toward the door, but before she left, she turned back one last time. "I did love you," she said, her voice cracking. "I know it doesn't matter now, but I did love you." I didn't answer. I couldn't. She waited a moment longer, then turned and walked out, leaving me alone in the silence of our broken home. The next morning, Jenna was gone. I woke up to an empty house, the weight of everything pressing down on me. The kids would be back soon, and I had to figure out how to move forward. But as I stood in the middle of the living room, looking at the remnants of the life we had built, all I felt was a deep, aching sense of loss. I had won. I had destroyed her, just like I'd planned. But in the end, I had destroyed myself too. The house felt emptier than ever, and the silence that had once felt like a victory now felt like a punishment. I thought I could move on, that I could rebuild my life without her. But now, Standing here in the wreckage of our marriage, I wasn't so sure. Revenge had its price, and I had paid it in full.